Hi guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A fascinating day of practice at Monza, especially with the ups and downs for Mercedes, ending the day with the fastest overall lap time with Lewis Hamilton in free practice too, but his replacement, we believe, for next season, that arguably they were looking to announce today, Mr. Kimi Antonelli bins it in the wall after only a couple of laps during free practice 1, but Toto Wolff and Mercedes definitely giving their perspective, because while yes, it was a mistake, there is a big debate. Is this going to be knocking his confidence? But actually, was his performance in pushing the limit so early on indicative of a driver that is going to be a serious threat in time to come? Antonelli, certainly Russell giving his response as well, because it definitely affected his afternoon in addition. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new. As always, plenty to get into. And firstly, on these comments from Mr. James Vowles on Logan Sargeant. Now, I'm not going to lie, these comments were harsh, and you don't usually see this from Vowles. And, you know, I know that some people are like turning on him or whatever because, you know, they maybe don't like his personality or whatever. But at the end of the day, Vowles is making a difficult decision, and now he's got to back it up. I do wonder whether some of these comments are inspired by maybe some pressure from Doralton. There were rumours the other day that they weren't happy with his decision to get rid of Sargeant, and, well, Vowles is being pretty stern-nosed, or whatever you want to say, stern-worded, I guess, on everything here. And he says Sargeant reached the limit of what he is able to achieve, and in fact it's almost unfair on him in continuing that, which is, you know, this strikes me as a Helmut Marko style quote. Not only saying that, you know, he could have said, Vowles, well, we reached the limit of what we could achieve together. We decided to move on. But no, Sargeant is, you know, getting slammed really by Vowles here. And Vowles is effectively saying, yeah, like I had no choice but to get rid of him because he wasn't good enough. It doesn't need to be said, but it was said. He reached the limit of what he's able to achieve, and says that, you know, it was bad for him if we kept him, which is pretty absurd, really. Although it may well be true, as I said the other day. He also went on to talk about Mick, right? Because Mick Schumacher was in the conversation to replace Sargeant. Of course, Colapinto eventually did. Colapinto did pretty well in his practice session today, although he was in the gravel at times. But Val says Mick is not special. He would only just be good. I think he would come with a lot more experience than Franco, but the future of Williams is not investing in the past. So, I mean, like, I don't know what's gone through James Vowles' head today, because I don't think he's wrong. Like, genuinely, I kind of like this take. It's harsh take. It's not something that I expected Vowles to really say. But he says, yeah, Mick, and also, you know, some other options, also Logan as well. He puts both of them into the category of not special drivers, talking about Logan and Mick, basically saying they're good drivers, not special drivers. So when you're putting finance into the academy, it made sense to put Colapinto instead. So, yeah, incredible words, I thought. And also, he did say, and I don't know if I really believe this, but intrigued to your thoughts on it in the comments, that Logan was not dropped because of his crash in practice. He was dropped because of overall performance. And, you know, Logan continues to just catch strays. I dug through his data with enough detail to see where he was performance-wise. It wasn't just one area. There was a lack still of tyre management, a lack of pace, and where he finished was just too far back. So what Vowles is saying is that they didn't drop him based on the crash in practice. They dropped him based on underwhelming race pace again, which hadn't changed. Although, clearly, the practice crash had something to do with it, because it did destroy their brand new upgrade package, which wasn't ideal. Talking of destroying a brand new upgrade package, let's talk about Antonelli, right? Because absolutely the story of the day, and an incredibly hyped up young prospect, and for a very good reason. Home race in front of, you know, obviously Italian driver, Italian prospect back on the grid. Massively exciting prospect for the sport, especially in Italy right then and there. So much media attention on him, so much pressure on him, and Antonelli goes out today in George Russell's car, his first ever practice session in a Formula 1 car of the current generation, and he immediately sticks it into P1. And this was incredible today, and my opinions on this are kind of mixed, because I definitely get the negativity angle that people are coming with, but I actually feel more confident that Antonelli is going to succeed in Formula 1 based on today than I did previously, just because of the way that he attacked the day, which was honestly mind-blowing. And I don't know whether it was somewhat Mercedes-induced, because it genuinely felt like Mercedes put Antonelli out there to do some glory runs, prove that he's the guy, and then they were going to announce him then and there. Apparently that was rumoured that that was the plan, to announce him after FP1. But after the crash, they were like, oh, well, maybe we can't do that. But usually a rookie will go out there, they'll get in the car, they'll drive around, you know, they'll do some kind of reconnaissance, they'll build up their confidence, then they'll go for it. But they decided, Mercedes, and Mercedes have to take some blame for this as well, to send Antonelli straight out there on soft and do a quali sim. That's what they decided to do. And he went P1 initially. He then was, I think, a second up on his second lap. And we'll have a look at it here in a second. And that is like, it's borderline insane, but all the best drivers are borderline insane. So we'll get to that in a second. The issue for Mercedes, especially though today, was that their plan was to do some comparisons between the new floor and the older floor. The new floor gives them more downforce, the old floor they think might give them better balance. I think on a circuit like Monza, where the curbs aren't really all that problematic, you definitely are riding the curbs, but they're certainly not the curbs they used to have in past years at Monza. It's not a circuit where porpoising or bouncing should really be a problem. So I think probably the faster floor will be the newer one, and that's what Antonelli was using when he crashed, of course, and they were trying to get some comparisons. Maybe it was actually the other way around and Hamilton was using the newer one, because I think he was in the second session, but whatever way round it was, they wanted some comparison data, and they weren't really able to achieve that, because Antonelli, after going green and then purple, and being, I think he was like 7/10 up on Hamilton's first sector in the first part of the lap, at least on when he did his fastest lap, he was then absolutely sending it in the middle sector, oversteps the mark, going into the parabolica and bins it into the wall, just like Burt Mylander did in the safety car just yesterday. So, and this was a big impact as well. Like, Antonelli's going off here. You're at pretty much max speed at this point, coming into a very fast right-hander. Antonelli was into the wall with a 45G impact. So this was a big crash at a big moment. And again, you know, the barriers, it's pretty funny how it worked out, right? Ants, because obviously Antonelli with the arrow pointing towards him. So that was somewhat poetic in a way. But yeah, quite the moment, isn't it, right? For Antonelli, with all the pressure on him to get into the car, George Russell being like, oh, great, you know, this is going to be my teammate for the new season, and then a few minutes later thinking, hang on a second, that's my car, that's my machine, that's my engine, my new engine, that's my upgrade package or whatever, right? And it did affect George Russell's day, and we'll see that in a second. This, of course, being Toto's reaction, which I'm sure I'll have to put on the thumbnail because this is comedy. So, you know, what a way for the day to begin in many respects. Antonelli into the wall and out of the session. Just a couple of laps in, so much discussion on this and whether, you know, he's not ready, right? Push the limits too far. Does he have what it takes? Is this going to knock and destroy his confidence? I don't think so, personally, because this guy seems to have otherworldly confidence in himself and his abilities. This was the lap, by the way, and people were looking at this lap, and he was absolutely sending it. I mean, the best place to look, really, I think, is going into Ascari. So he's coming up to the Ascari chicane here. Look how much of the track that he takes. He's all the way, almost onto the grass here. This is his second run in qualifying with a car that he's never driven before. And he's got the confidence just to send it through Ascari, you know, kisses the curb, nails this part, and he's obviously on for an absolute banger lap. I mean, he would have been P1 here by a margin. I think he would have been P1 by at least half a second over Hamilton had he put this lap together. But obviously the experienced drivers, you know, they build it up, right? They don't go crazy, and I'm sure that's a lesson that Antonelli will learn, that, okay, sure, I can push, and I'm capable of being able to find the limits quite quickly. Obviously, here he overstepped the limits, but the rest of the lap I was actually really impressed by. Like, you know, he was pushing the limits, but he wasn't over the limit at any point until, you know, maybe a gust of wind or whatever caught him off guard at the parabolica. And these are rookie mistakes. These are things that happen, right? But I'm not going to lie, I come out of the day more impressed than not, I think, by the fact that Antonelli hopped into this car and immediately had the confidence and the ability to send it very close to the absolute limits. You might argue this guy's just nuts, but you might also argue that the guy has incredible raw instinct and talent to be able to do that. And look, obviously he makes the mistake, he crashes out of qualifying. That's not good for practice. That's not good for everybody, not least himself. But and I'm sure that in hindsight, I'd have liked to have got far more laps on the boards than he eventually did. But I don't really think this will have shaken Mercedes' perception all that much, and we'll see the evidence of that here in a second. Verstappen actually ends the session on top, and Red Bull were pretty happy today with the way their car was. Max wasn't over the moon, let's be honest, with the way that it was performing, but they were definitely faster today, certainly in the long run sims, as we shall see in a second. But Antonelli, of course, was okay. I mean, he had a big impact. And apparently he was meant to do media right after the session, but he didn't do it because he wasn't feeling like particularly well. He wasn't feeling 100%, which doesn't surprise me after that big crash. But he was back on track in Formula 2 qualifying very shortly afterwards, and we'll discuss that in a second. So Toto says he apologized. That's what you got to do when you bring a car back that looks like a Lego box falling on the floor, right? Lots of bits everywhere that I had to work to solve quickly. This was interesting, though, from Toto Wolff on the entire situation because, yes, Antonelli put it in the wall, but every single time Antonelli gets in a Formula 1 car, certainly a Mercedes, he seems to massively impress their engineers. And it happened again because Toto says that this crash has no impact on the lineup. They're going to continue to hire based on ability. But he went on to say, our problem with Antonelli is to slow the guy down. We don't have any problem making him any faster. What we saw in those 1.5 laps was astonishing. So, like, maybe astonishing in terms of this guy might actually be, like, insane. But the way that Toto said it was more like just astonishing pace that he's able to deliver immediately in that car. And obviously it went too far at the Parabolica, but I mean, the way that he was sending that car through the corners was, I don't know, it strikes me that Antonelli is a special driver. And maybe he's going to be special in the same way that Max Verstappen was, where he's going to have unreal pace, but for the first couple of years, he is going to be putting it into the wall a lot and making lots of mistakes. I mean, it happened with Max, it may well happen with Antonelli, and Mercedes are prepared to accept that for the upside. But I also see the arguments that, well, he's not ready, they should have put him in another car for a year, but my feeling is if he's got what it takes, and I think that he probably does, he's going to learn quicker being in a top car and a top seat, and I think it's, for all parties in the long run, probably the thing to do. Antonelli then says, a mistake on my side, just pushing a bit too much in the conditions, and also that's the thing, the brand new track, right? I mean, they've just resurfaced the track, new tarmac, so if there was any conditions that were going to be the most challenging, it was the track when the track was super green at the start of the first free practice session, and he's out there on softs putting in glory runs. Like, it's kind of insane, I'm not going to lie. And he says, lesson learned for next time, and there will be a next time. Definitely Toto said that he's going to be back in the car probably in Mexico for another free practice session there, and he's not going to be in the Williams, obviously, so, you know, he'll get a couple more FP1s, and then he's going to be in that Mercedes, we think, next year. Free practice was interesting, though. Helmut Marko was pretty happy with the way that Red Bull were looking. They reckon they've definitely made steps to make their car more predictable. So, you know, they're missing speed in Sector 1. However, lots of that might be engine related because lots of these guys obviously turn down their engine modes when they come into these sessions. Free Practice 2 then gets underway. We'll discuss some of these times in a second. But just before this, actually, Kimi Antonelli was then back in his Formula 2 car racing with Prema in their qualifying session. And this was actually, I thought, extremely impressive from Antonelli again, because the Prema is not the best car. Everyone knows this. It's been struggling this year heavily in Formula 2, and Antonelli was on provisional pole, and he actually ended up 6th in the end, just a couple of tenths off Maloney, who was eventually P1. But this is what I thought was impressive, right? Because Ollie Behrman is great around Monza. He proved that here last year. I think he won one of the races, maybe. Was definitely very competitive around here last year in his Formula 2 campaign as well. And he's in that same Prema, and Antonelli just a couple of hours, and obviously Behrman's going to drive for Haas next year. He's that highly rated, right? And Behrman in the Prema, the same Prema that Antonelli was in, Antonelli, you know, put a 1/10.5 on him after having a 45G crash shortly before in a very different car. So, you know, I think he's got what it takes, personally, after watching today, but there will be, and understandably, very much mixed opinions after the result of that. Now, let's talk about free practice too, because some fascinating input, really, from the drivers in terms of who's going to be fast and who's not going to be. The Ferraris, they were looking pretty good. Now, in terms of raw overall pace, they were there or thereabouts, and in terms of long-run data, it's looking pretty tasty as well. Of course, they've got a major upgrade this weekend, Ferrari, and the rumour has it it, there's way more to come from them in terms of overall performance. From their engine, in terms of the fact that they can ramp up the power quite significantly. One of the key points to notice, though, that basically every team is struggling to some extent with overheating tyres. I don't know if the teams are going to be able to get away with a one-stop this weekend, because the tyres were degrading badly. It was hot out there. Hamilton was saying that he was coming out of the pits and his tyres were too hot before he was barely even starting his qualifying sim. I think one of the laps he was like, I'm trying to do a cool down lap and it's just not possible to cool these tyres down, so he came into the pits to try and do it. That is a concern for Mercedes tyre deg, but at the same time, their car seems pretty rapid. Hamilton put in the fastest lap of the quali sim runs, a 1:20.7. Norris was 3 thousandths behind. Sainz was a 10th. Piastri was there or thereabouts. Leclerc was there or thereabouts as well. Now, the Red Bulls didn't really do the same running here. In FP2, by the way, Hamilton had the new floor, Russell had the old floor, and eventually Russell got out there, but it did take a bit of time for them to get his car fixed, which was obviously not optimal at all. This was Verstappen, and also Perez did this at the first chicane, locking up, struggling with the balance of the car, and Verstappen had one moment through the Parabolica where he could barely collect the thing, and he was like, what the hell is going on with the balance of this machine? But it seems like Red Bull have found a better compromise, found a solution they want to go forward and work with. But the Mercedes was definitely struggling with a few things. The seats being incredibly hot was absolutely one of them, and Hamilton and Russell both talked about this, and it certainly will be a problem that they've got to solve overnight going into tomorrow. These were some of the sector times as well. We can see that some of the drivers, like clearly Piastri and Norris, had some different setup options they were going for here. And the Mercedes and the Red Bull not even appearing on here during sector 1 because they were running different setup, of course, with lower overall top speed. This was that moment, by the way, for Verstappen, who's kind of coming through the Parabolica and is really struggling with the steering wheel, goes wide and eventually gets it back on track. So definitely questions on that. The big question, though, is what's the race pace going to look like here? Now, race pace is important at Monza, but we know that historically it's pretty hard to overtake around here, and that is probably still going to be true this year. So qualifying is maybe the most important thing. There's a pretty crazy stat. Since the turn of the millennium, Monza has been won from pole more often than Monaco has, which may surprise you, but that's true. 15 times at Monza, 14 times for Monaco. So here we are with some of the race pace data, and not gonna lie, this data varies massively with who you look at it on. I'm gonna trust this spreadsheet here because this has all of the data, and yes, the tyre degradation was pretty significant for many of the teams, and actually some of the lap time data was kind of all over the place. I mean, even for Max, right, he starts on a 25 low, 24 high, and then ends on his final lap with a 26.7, 26.3 on his ninth. So quite clearly, there was some significant tyre deg coming into play. Perez's long runs didn't go long enough to really comment on that, but you can see the same trend for Piastri. You can see the same trend for Leclerc to some degree. Hamilton's lap time, though, was interesting because he started off being relatively conservative in terms of what lap times he was putting in, and then towards the end tried to go a bit faster, and he actually was capable of doing so. So it's actually very even, I think. Definitely Mercedes will have some questions on their tyre deg, but Max was averaging a 125, let's say 4, Norris on a 125, 2.5, Piastri about there as well, Sainz and Leclerc about there as well, and Hamilton about there as well. So all of the teams look to be within a couple of tenths in terms of pace. But then again, how much engine mode is there to come? What were the fuel loads? Obviously, it's always difficult to say, and Hamilton was struggling with the hot temperatures during the long runs for sure, but in the end he does top free practice 2. So a fascinating day of action, really. There was also some other analysis that had Max at a 125.4, Leclerc at a 25.6. So these are pretty similar to what we've just seen, to be fair, but a couple of the numbers are slightly different. Depends the way you look at it, depends the way you look at the outliers, stuff like that. But yeah, it does look pretty close, but the rumour has it that if there's any teams that have more to give in terms of the engine based on the GPS data, it's probably Ferrari, and it's actually probably Red Bull, right? So Red Bull and Verstappen, it seems, are coming out of today relatively confident in their car. Marco says there's far more optimism in the Red Bull camp than there was at Zandvoort, and of course they ended second at Zandvoort, so maybe that means first this weekend. And of course, if you are Lando Norris trying to get pole tomorrow and Max is seconds, then I think we can probably put a bet on as to who's leading into turn 1, to be perfectly honest. But tweet your thoughts in the comments below on that one. Hamilton says a good day, however, generally felt pretty good. New tarmacs a challenge, the new curbs as well. Car felt good from the start. Obviously a bit of graining, so got to work on a few things. But overall, Hamilton was pretty happy. Verstappen seems pretty happy. Russell, though, was not especially happy. Of course, after what happened with Antonelli and only getting one session in, it was, of course, cut short. He's like, yeah, not the most productive Friday that I've ever had. So clearly some frustrations coming out of him. So very much interested to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.